While the headline about a billionaire heiress finding her prince in the front seat of a town car makes for a fantastic story, the press's version of events is absolute garbage. The media desperately wants to sell this kiss of life narrative as a modern fairy tale, but the reality is completely different. There was no romance in the back of that SUV. There was only panic, the metallic taste of blood, the sickening crack of a rib under the heel of his hand, and the desperate realization that if this woman died on his shift, he wouldn't make rent. Alfred stared at the digital clock on the dashboard. 6:42 p.m. 18 minutes until his shift ended. 18 minutes until he could hand the keys of the black Lincoln Navigator back to the fleet manager, take the subway to Brooklyn, and relieve Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who charged him $8 an hour to watch his daughter, Maya. He did the math in his head. It was a habit he hated, but couldn't break. $8 an hour, times 4 hours, $32. His cut of the driving fare today was roughly $90. He was up $58 for 12 hours of dealing with New York traffic. It was a quiet kind of bleeding out. Pull up to the glass doors. The voice from the back seat belonged to Camilla Hayes. She was 32. The CEO of a predictive analytics firm that had just gone public and worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.4 billion. Alfred knew this because the dispatcher had warned him not to screw this up. She's a platinum client, Artie. VIP. Do not talk to her. Do not look at her in the rear view. Alfred didn't care about her net worth. He cared about the fact that she was currently eating a scone that was shedding microscopic crumbs onto the leather upholstery he would have to vacuum later. He guided the Lincoln to the curb outside a towering glass high-rise in Tribeca. He put the car in park and waited. Camilla didn't move to get out. She was furiously typing on her phone, her thumb a blur against the screen. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer that probably cost more than Alfred's car, and her hair was pulled back into a severe utilitarian knot. She looked tired. Not the bone-deep, physical exhaustion Alfred felt, but a brittle, high-strung kind of tired, like a guitar string pulled one twist away from snapping. "Give me 3 minutes," she muttered, not looking up. "The board is having a collective aneurysm." "Take your time, Ms. Hayes," Alfred said. The meter was technically still running. Silence descended on the car, save for the rhythmic tapping of her nails on the glass screen. Then, the tapping stopped. Alfred glanced in the rearview mirror. Camilla had dropped her phone. It sat on the floor mat, illuminating her ankle. She was leaning forward, her hands clutching her throat. "Ms. Hayes?" She didn't answer. A harsh, wet wheeze tore out of her chest. It sounded like air being forced through a crushed straw. Her face, previously pale and composed, was flushing violently red. Hives, angry and raised, were blooming across her neck and jawline. Alfred threw the car into park and unbuckled his seatbelt. He scrambled out of the driver's seat, yanking open the rear door. Hey, look at me," he said, keeping his voice level. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Can you breathe?" Camilla's eyes were wide, white all around the irises. Genuine terror stripped away the billionaire CEO, leaving only an animal suffocating in a trap. She shook her head, her fingers digging into the flesh of her own neck, leaving crescent-shaped marks. Anaphylaxis. Alfred's mind flashed to Maya's peanut allergy. He knew the look. "EpiPen. Where is it?" he demanded, grabbing her purse. He upended it on the pristine leather seat. A leather wallet, a compact, keys, tampons, a wad of receipts. No pen. She slumped forward, gagging. Her lips were turning a bruised, dusky blue. Alfred dragged her out of the car. She was dead weight, her limbs uncoordinated and thrashing weakly. He laid her flat on the cold concrete sidewalk, ignoring the stares of the pedestrians walking by. Someone shouted. A woman in a trench coat pulled out her phone and started recording. "Call 911!" Alfred roared at the woman, his voice echoing off the glass facade of the building. He looked down at Camilla. Her chest had stopped moving. The wheezing was gone. Silence. Damn it. Alfred dropped to his knees. He tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and sealed his mouth over hers. It wasn't a kiss. It was an invasion. He blew hard, forcing air past her swollen airway. It tasted like expensive coffee and stomach acid. He pulled back, watching her chest. Nothing. The air wasn't getting past the swelling. He interlaced his fingers, placed the heel of his hand squarely in the center of her chest, locked his elbows, and shoved his body weight downward. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 8th compression, something gave way beneath his palms with a sickening crunch. A rib. He flinched but kept pushing. He couldn't stop for broken ribs. A bone could be fixed. Brain death could not. 28, 29, 30. He pinched her nose again, sealed his mouth over hers. Blew. Pushed harder this time. He felt the air force its way into her lungs. He went back to the chest. Sirens began to wail in the distance, a rising scream cutting through the hum of the city. Alfred didn't hear them. His world had narrowed to the span of Camilla Hayes' sternum and the frantic pounding of his own heart. Sweat dripped from his nose, landing on her tailored blazer. He tasted blood where he had bitten the inside of his own cheek. "Come on," he grunted between compressions. "Don't do this. Come on." Rough hands grabbed his shoulders, hauling him backward. Paramedics. 2 of them, moving with practiced, chaotic efficiency. One ripped open Camilla's shirt, exposing her chest, while the other plunged a needle directly into her thigh. Alfred stumbled back, hitting the side of the Lincoln. He slid down the door until he was sitting on the pavement. His arms were shaking so violently he had to tuck his hands between his knees. He sat there, covered in sweat and street grime, tasting another woman's dying breath, and thought about how he was definitely going to be late to pick up Maya. The waiting room at Mount Sinai Hospital smelled like industrial bleach and stale anxiety. Alfred sat in a plastic chair that seemed designed specifically to cause lower back pain. It was 10:45 p.m. He had called Mrs. Gable, promised her time and a half for the extra hours, and swallowed the nausea of knowing that wiped out his earnings for the week. He couldn't leave. The police had taken his statement. The fleet manager had called screaming about abandoning the vehicle before hanging up when Alfred mentioned a medical emergency. But Alfred stayed. He needed to know if the woman whose ribs he had shattered was going to wake up. The double doors of the ER swung open, and the reality of Camilla Hayes' world walked in. There were 3 of them. A tall man in a navy suit who looked like a lawyer, a shorter, sharper-looking woman holding a tablet, and a massive guy who was obviously private security. They didn't look frantic. They looked like an executive crisis management team descending on a PR disaster. The woman with the tablet zeroed in on Alfred. She didn't walk. She marched. "Alfred Pendleton?" she asked. Her tone was brisk, devoid of warmth. "Yeah," Alfred said, slowly standing up. His knees popped. "I'm Sarah, Chief of Staff for Ms. Hayes. This is David, Head of Legal," she said, gesturing to the man in the suit. "First, Ms. Hayes is stabilized. The epinephrine arrested the anaphylactic shock. She's resting." Alfred let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 hours. "Good. That's good." "What was it?" "A macadamia nut paste, used in a pastry she consumed earlier," Sarah said smoothly, as if reading from a press release. "We are extremely grateful for your quick intervention, Mr. Pendleton." David, the lawyer, stepped forward. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "We'd like to express our gratitude more tangibly. Ms. Hayes' privacy is our utmost priority. We know there were bystanders. We know cell phone footage exists." Alfred stared at the envelope. He knew exactly what it was. "Inside is a cashier's check for $25,000, David said, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "And a standard non-disclosure agreement. It simply states you will not speak to the press, post on social media, or give interviews regarding the events of this evening, Ms. Hayes' medical condition, or the physical contact involved in the resuscitation." The physical contact. They meant the mouth-to-mouth. They meant the headline, "Waiting to happen." Alfred looked at the men and women standing in front of him. They were perfectly groomed, heavily perfumed, and utterly insulated from the reality of the street. 25 grand. To them, it was petty cash. To Alfred, it was 6 months of rent. It was braces for Maya. It was a used car that didn't have a check engine light permanently burned into the dashboard. It was salvation, and it felt like a slap in the face. He didn't hate rich people. He was too tired to hate anyone. But the sheer transactional coldness of it, buying his silence before the woman was even out of the ICU, ignited a slow, burning anger in his chest. "I broke her rib," Alfred said abruptly. Sarah blinked. "Excuse me?" "I broke her rib," Alfred repeated, looking David dead in the eye. "During CPR. The compressions. I heard it snap." "The medical staff informed us," David said, recovering quickly. "Given the circumstances, we do not intend to pursue any liability claims against you for the physical injury. The NDA covers a mutual release of—" "I don't want your money," Alfred said. The words tasted like ash. He was an idiot. A prideful, stupid idiot. But he couldn't take it. Not like this. Not like a bribe to pretend he hadn't had his hands buried in someone's dying chest. David frowned. "Mr. Pendleton, I urge you to reconsider. This is a very generous—" "I want her to pay my fleet manager for the detailing of the back seat," Alfred interrupted. "And I want her to cover the $70 I owe my babysitter for keeping me here tonight." "That's it." Sarah and David exchanged a look. It was the look reserved for a stray dog that refuses a piece of steak. "Mr. Pendleton," Sarah started, her voice taking on a patronizing edge. "Tell you what," Alfred said, stepping past them toward the exit. "Keep the 25 grand. Just tell her to carry a damn EpiPen next time. It's cheaper." He walked out into the humid New York night, the automatic door sliding shut behind him. He had $20 in his wallet, a stain of vomit on his jeans, and a massive headache. Upstairs, in a private suite overlooking the city, Camilla Hayes opened her eyes. Her throat felt like it had been scrubbed with wire wool. Her chest radiated a sharp, agonizing pain with every shallow breath. She turned her head. Sarah was standing by the bed. "Is it handled?" Camilla rasped, her voice a broken whisper. "The PR team has a lid on the street footage," Sarah said quickly. "We're spinning it as a minor fainting spell due to exhaustion." "The driver?" Sarah hesitated. "He refused the NDA. And the money." Camilla's eyes, dull with medication, sharpened slightly. In her world, everyone had a price. Everyone. When someone refused money, it didn't mean they were noble. It meant they wanted something else, something bigger. "What did he ask for?" Camilla wheezed. $70 for a babysitter, Sarah said, looking deeply uncomfortable. "And the cost of detailing the town car." Camilla stared at the ceiling. The pain in her ribs pulsed in time with her heartbeat. A dull, rhythmic ache. "He broke my rib," she thought. "He broke my rib to keep my heart beating." "Find out everything about him," Camilla whispered, closing her eyes. "By tomorrow." The eviction notice was pink. Alfred thought that was a weird choice. Pink was supposed to be a cheerful color. Bubble gum, cotton candy, little girls' ballet tutus. Not a legal threat to remove him and his belongings from the premises in 14 days. He folded the paper and shoved it into his back pocket, leaning against the counter of his microscopic kitchen. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble of 3 days without a shave. It had been a week since the incident. A week since he walked away from $25,000 out of sheer, stubborn pride. And the universe, in its infinite sense of irony, had punished him for it immediately. 2 days after the hospital, Alfred had logged into the driver portal to start his shift, only to find his account suspended, pending investigation. He called the fleet manager, who told him that Hayes Corporate Security had flagged him. They were doing a deep background check because he refused the NDA. Until they cleared him, the luxury car service couldn't let him drive. He was a liability. He had saved her life, and her paranoia had cost him his livelihood. "Dad, the water is bubbling," Alfred, snapped out of it. He looked over at the stove. Maya, standing on a step stool that was missing a rubber foot, was pointing at a pot of boiling water. She was 6, all elbows and knees, with missing front teeth and a messy braid that Alfred had tried, and failed, to make look neat that morning. "Thanks, Bug," Alfred said, forcing a smile he didn't feel. He grabbed the blue box of generic macaroni and cheese and dumped the noodles in. "Gourmet dinner tonight. Le macaroni." Maya giggled. "You're silly." A sharp knock at the door killed the laughter in the room. Alfred stiffened. He glanced at the clock. 7 p.m. The landlord didn't come knocking this late. "Go sit on the couch, Maya," he said quietly. He walked to the door, his muscles tensing. He didn't look through the peephole. The glass was cracked anyway. He undid the deadbolt and pulled the door open, ready to tell whoever it was to come back on Friday. He froze. Standing in the dingy, flickering fluorescent light of the hallway was Camilla Hayes. She looked different. No tailored suit. She wore dark jeans, a black cashmere sweater, and a heavy wool coat. She looked smaller than she had in the back of the SUV, perhaps because she was favoring her left side, holding her arm tightly against her ribs. 2 massive men in suits stood 10 feet back down the hall, trying to look inconspicuous and failing miserably. "Mr. Pendleton," Camilla said. Her voice was stronger than it had been in the hospital, but still carried a rasp. Alfred stared at her. The anger, the sheer exhaustion of the last week, boiled up in his throat. "You've got a lot of nerve coming here," Alfred said, keeping his voice low so Maya wouldn't hear. "Have your lawyers found a way to sue me for the broken rib yet?" Camilla didn't flinch. She looked past him, into the apartment. Her eyes swept over the peeling linoleum, the second-hand couch, the radiator that leaked rusty water onto the floorboards. She saw Maya, sitting quietly on the sofa, watching them with wide eyes. When Camilla looked back at Alfred, her expression was unreadable. "Well, I found out yesterday that my security team flagged your employment file," Camilla said, her tone businesslike, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of discomfort. "It's standard protocol for an UNNDA'd individual who has been in close contact. It triggered an automatic suspension with your fleet manager." "Yeah, I know," Alfred said, his grip on the doorframe tightening. "Standard protocol means I can't buy groceries this week. So if you're here to apologize, don't. Just unflag my file so I can go back to work." "I did better than that," Camilla said. "I bought the fleet." Alfred blinked. "What?" "I bought the luxury transport company. Yesterday," Camilla said smoothly, though she winced slightly as she shifted her weight. "I fired the fleet manager who suspended you. Your account is reinstated, with a promotion, if you want it." Alfred let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You bought a whole company just to give me my job back? What? Did your PR team tell you that's how humans say thank you?" "I don't have a PR team for my personal life," Camilla snapped, a flash of genuine irritation breaking through her calm veneer. "And I don't like owing debts. You saved my life. I ruined your week. I am fixing it. I told your people in the hospital. I don't want your money or your charity," Alfred said, stepping forward, invading her space just enough to make the bodyguards down the hall twitch. "I did what anyone would have done." "No, you didn't," Camilla said, her voice dropping, losing the corporate edge. She looked up at him, and for the first time, Alfred saw the vulnerability he had seen in the car. Anyone else would have waited for the ambulance so they couldn't be sued, or they would have taken the $25,000. You didn't either. She reached into her coat pocket. Alfred tensed, but she only pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not a check, not a legal document. "This is an address," Camilla said, holding it out. "It's a private clinic in Manhattan. I have an appointment tomorrow at noon to check the bone healing. They need a sworn statement for the medical file regarding the exact pressure and angle of the CPR compressions." Alfred looked at the paper, then at her. "Why do I need to be there for that?" "Because," Camilla said, a faint, bitter smile touching the corners of her mouth, "my lawyers won't let me drive myself while on painkillers. I trust absolutely no one in my company right now, and you're the only driver I know who won't hesitate to break my ribs if I start choking again." Alfred stared at the piece of paper. He could hear the water boiling over on the stove behind him, sizzling as it hit the burner. He looked at the woman standing in his doorway, a billionaire who solved problems by throwing money at them, suddenly trying, awkwardly, to deal with a debt she couldn't buy her way out of. 12 noon, Alfred said, snatching the paper from her hand. "But I'm taking a lunch break at 1, and I'm billing you for the gas." Camilla's smile widened, just a fraction. It reached her eyes this time. "Understood, Mr. Pendleton." She turned and walked down the hallway, her bodyguards falling in step behind her. Alfred watched her go, a strange, sinking feeling in his stomach. He had a feeling the meter on this ride had just restarted, and he had no idea what the fare was going to be. The midday sun glared off the hood of the Lincoln Navigator. Alfred sat in the driver's seat, idling outside a brutalist concrete building on the Upper East Side. He watched the digital clock tick over to 11:58 a.m. Right on time, the heavy oak doors of the building opened. Camilla walked out alone. She was wearing an oversized trench coat that hid her frame, sunglasses that hid her eyes, and a scowl that warned the world to keep its distance. She moved stiffly, guarding her left side. Alfred popped the trunk and stepped out, moving to open the rear passenger door. Camilla walked right past it. She pulled open the front passenger door and slid in. Alfred stood on the curb for a second, the rear door still hanging open. He shut it, walked around the hood, and climbed behind the wheel. The cabin suddenly felt very small. "The back seat has more legroom," Alfred noted, shifting the car into drive. "The back seat feels like a waiting room," Camilla replied, staring straight out the windshield. "I've spent enough time in waiting rooms this week. Drive." Alfred merged into the relentless flow of Manhattan traffic. He kept his eyes on the road, but in his peripheral vision, he could see her tense every time the SUV hit a pothole. New York streets were notoriously unforgiving, and the Navigator's suspension could only absorb so much. "You're driving like my grandmother," she muttered after a taxi cut them off, and Alfred braked with agonizing slowness. "I'm driving like I have a passenger with a fractured sternum and 2 cracked ribs," Alfred shot back. "If you want whiplash, call a cab." She didn't reply, but she didn't complain again. They rode in silence for 15 minutes. It wasn't the comfortable silence of old friends, but it lacked the suffocating tension of their previous encounters. It was the silence of 2 people trying to figure out the rules of engagement. Alfred's phone, mounted on the dashboard, buzzed. A text message flashed across the screen. "Mrs. Gable. Maya threw up her lunch. No fever. Just thought I should know. She is watching cartoons," Alfred sighed, his shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. He tapped out a quick reply at a red light. "Everything all right?" Camilla asked. "Daughter's sick," Alfred said, pocketing the phone. "Nothing serious, just enough to derail the afternoon." "How old?" "6. Camilla reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a sleek, titanium laptop. She flipped it open. "What's her name?" "Maya." "Maya," Camilla repeated. The name sounded foreign in her mouth, as if she rarely spoke about anything that couldn't be measured in profit margins. She began typing, her fingers flying across the keys with ruthless efficiency. "I assume the $70 I owe you covered the child care for the night of the incident?" "It did." "Good." She didn't look up from her screen. "Because my legal team is currently drafting a restructuring plan for the fleet company. As of Monday, you are no longer a driver." Alfred hit the brakes a little too hard. Camilla winced, her hand flying to her ribs. "Sorry," Alfred said instinctively, before his anger flared. "Wait, you bought the company to reinstate me, and now you're firing me?" "I'm promoting you," she corrected, her eyes scanning a spreadsheet. "Director of Logistics. You'll oversee fleet maintenance, driver schedules, and client routing. Desk job, benefits, health insurance, dental for Maya." Alfred gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles turned white. "I don't know the first thing about corporate logistics," he said, keeping his voice dangerously low. "You know how to survive 12-hour shifts in this city," Camilla countered, finally closing the laptop and turning to face him. "You calculate time, distance, and cost in your head faster than my algorithms do. I watched you do it when you negotiated your exit from the hospital. You're practical." My current logistics director is an idiot who thinks throwing money at a traffic jam makes it disappear. I need someone who actually knows how the streets work." Alfred pulled the car up to the curb outside the private medical clinic. He put it in park and turned to look at her. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Camilla held his gaze. Behind the designer sunglasses, he could see the dark circles under her eyes. She looked exhausted. "Because I have $1 billion in the bank, Alfred. And when I was suffocating on the pavement, none of it mattered," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The only thing that mattered was a guy making minimum wage who decided not to let me die. I don't know how to handle debts I can't write a check for. So, take the job. Let me balance the ledger." She opened the door and stepped out onto the sidewalk, wincing as she stood straight. "Wait here," she said, shutting the door. Alfred sat in the idling car, the hum of the engine vibrating through his boots. He looked at the dashboard clock. He had rent to pay. He had an eviction notice in his pocket. He had a sick kid at home. He didn't want her charity. But looking at the brutal reality of his life, he was starting to realize that pride didn't pay for pediatric dental care. The new title came with a corner office in a glass building overlooking the East River, a salary that made Alfred physically nauseous to look at on paper, and an overwhelming sense of imposter syndrome. He had spent his first 2 weeks as director of logistics wearing his only decent suit, staring at spreadsheets and firing 3 dispatchers who had been skimming off the top of driver tips. He didn't feel like a corporate executive. He felt like a mechanic playing dress-up. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the illusion shattered. Alfred was in the break room, pouring a cup of coffee that tasted suspiciously like burnt plastic, when his cell phone rang. It was his landlord, Mr. Henderson, a man whose voice usually meant a broken water heater or an angry demand for late rent. "Henderson," Alfred answered cautiously. "I mailed the check on Friday. It should be—" "I don't care about the check, Pendleton," Henderson interrupted, his voice laced with a bizarre mix of deference and irritation. "I'm calling to tell you the contractors are coming tomorrow at 8 a.m. They need you to clear the furniture away from the radiators." Alfred frowned. "Contractors? For what?" "For the central heating," Henderson said, sounding confused. "And the new windows. Didn't the new management company tell you?" "New management company?" "Yeah, some LLC bought the whole block yesterday. Paid cash, way over market value. First thing they did was order top-to-bottom renovations for your unit and 3 others. Look, just have the place ready, all right?" The line went dead. Alfred stood in the break room, the coffee mug warming his hand. Slowly, the realization crept up his spine, cold and infuriating. Some LLC. He dumped the coffee into the sink. He didn't walk to the elevator. He took the stairs down 2 flights to the executive floor. Camilla's office was a massive expanse of polished concrete, white leather, and floor-to-ceiling windows. Her chief of staff, Sarah, sat at a desk outside the heavy wooden door. "Alfred, she's on a call with the London—" Sarah started. Alfred ignored her. He pushed past the desk and shoved the heavy door open. Camilla was sitting at her desk, a headset in her ear, staring at a monitor. She looked up, startled, as the door slammed shut behind him. "I'll have to call you back, Richard," she said smoothly, tapping an earpiece. She took the headset off. "We have a protocol for entering this office, Alfred." "Did you buy my apartment building?" he asked. The question hung in the air, blunt and heavy. Camilla leaned back in her chair. She didn't feign ignorance. She didn't look guilty. She looked like a chess player examining the board. "I purchased a block of real estate in Brooklyn as a long-term investment, yes," she said evenly. "Don't give me the corporate spin," Alfred snapped, stepping closer to the desk. "You bought my building. You ordered renovations for my apartment." "Your building has black mold in the stairwell, a failing boiler and security doors that don't lock," Camilla stated, opening a file on her desk. "It is entirely unfit for habitation, especially for a child." "It's my home," Alfred fired back, his voice rising. "It's my life. You don't get to just buy it and fix it because it offends your sensibilities." Camilla stood up. The wince was gone. Her ribs were healing. She planted her hands flat on the desk, leaning toward him. I fix things that are broken, Alfred. It's what I do. It is literally how I built my company, she said, her voice matching his intensity. You were facing eviction. You had a pink slip in your back pocket 3 weeks ago. I saw it. Alfred froze. You went through my things. I didn't have to. You left it on your kitchen counter when I came to your apartment, she said, her eyes flashing. I am trying to help you. By buying my neighborhood? Alfred laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. What's next, Camilla? Are you going to buy Maya's school to make sure she gets better grades? Are you going to buy the grocery store to make sure I eat right? Where does it stop? It stops when you are safe, she said abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. The anger drained out of Alfred, replaced by a profound, heavy exhaustion. He looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the ironclad control she wielded, and beneath it, the desperate need to exert that control to feel secure. I am not a failing subsidiary, Camilla, Alfred said quietly. I'm not a logistics problem for you to solve. I'm a man. I take care of my daughter. We struggle, yeah, but we survive. On our own. He turned and walked toward the door. Alfred, she called out. There was a crack in her voice, a tiny fissure in the armor. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. You saved my life, she whispered. Let me save yours. Alfred looked back over his shoulder. You already gave me a job, Camilla. That was enough. You can't buy my dignity. Sell the building. Or I quit. He walked out, leaving the door open behind him. It was 2:14 a.m. Alfred was sitting on his second-hand couch, staring at the muted television. The light from the screen painted the cramped apartment in flickering shades of blue and gray. The renovations hadn't started yet. He didn't know if they ever would. He hadn't spoken to Camilla in 3 days, communicating only through terse emails regarding fleet routing. A knock at the door startled him. He grabbed the heavy metal flashlight he kept under the couch cushion and walked to the door. He peered through the cracked peephole. He unbolted the door and pulled it open. Camilla stood in the hallway. She looked terrible. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe, immaculate knot, was loose and slightly tangled. She was wearing a faded college sweatshirt and gray sweatpants. Her feet were shoved into expensive loafers without socks. There were no bodyguards down the hall. No lawyers. No Sarah. Just a woman looking completely, utterly defeated. Can I come in? She asked. Her voice was raspy, hollowed out. Alfred stepped aside. He shut the door and locked it behind her. Camilla walked into the middle of the small living room and stopped. She looked at the peeling wallpaper, the cheap rug, the stack of Maya's coloring books on the coffee table. She didn't look at it with pity this time. She looked at it like it was a raft in the middle of the ocean. They forced a vote, she said, her back to him. Alfred set the flashlight down on the counter. Who did? The board. My board, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. Richard, the man I was on the phone with the day you stormed into my office. He called an emergency session, claimed my medical leave and recent erratic behavior proved I was unfit to lead the company through the upcoming merger. Erratic behavior? Camilla turned to face him. Her eyes were red. Buying a luxury transport company, firing my executive logistics director, spending millions on a decaying residential block in Brooklyn. She let out a weak, breathy laugh. They used you to build a case against me. Alfred felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Did they fire you? They put me on an indefinite leave of absence, stripped my voting rights. The buyout clause will trigger in 30 days, she said. She sank down onto the cheap fabric of the couch, burying her face in her hands. I built that company in my garage. It took me 10 years. They took it in 10 hours. Alfred stood in the kitchen. He didn't know what to do. In his world, when a person lost a job, they panicked about groceries. They looked for another shift. They didn't lose empires. He walked over to the tiny kitchenette, grabbed a chipped ceramic mug, and poured a measure of cheap bourbon from a bottle he kept above the fridge. He walked over to the couch and held it out. Camilla looked up, took the mug, and downed it in one fluid motion. She coughed as the cheap alcohol burned down her throat. "God, that's awful," she gasped, wiping her mouth. "It kills the germs," Alfred said, sitting down on the opposite end of the couch. They sat in silence for a long time. The streetlights from the avenue cast long, barred shadows across the floor. "I sold the building," Camilla said quietly, tracing the rim of the empty mug with her thumb. "The paperwork went through this morning. To a non-profit housing trust. They won't evict anyone. They'll just fix the boiler." Alfred looked at her. The apology wasn't spoken, but it hung loudly in the space between them. "Thank you," he said. "I didn't know where else to go tonight," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "My apartment felt like a vault. Everyone I know works for me, or wants something from me, or just stab me in the back. You're the only person I know who actually told me no." Alfred leaned back against the cushions. "Yeah, well, I'm stubborn." Camilla turned her head to look at him. Stripped of the blazers, the wealth, and the armor, she looked remarkably young and terrifyingly fragile. "What do I do now, Alfred?" she asked. The billionaire CEO, asking a single dad with a suspended driver's license for life advice? Alfred thought about the night he pulled her from the car, the crushing weight of the chest compressions, the desperate need to keep the air moving. "You breathe," Alfred said gently. "You wait for the swelling to go down, and then you figure out how to stand up. Surviving a crisis requires a few key steps. Assess the damage. Look at what is actually broken versus what is just bruised. Stop the bleeding. Cut off the things and people that are draining resources. Rebuild the foundation. Focus on the immediate reality. Food, sleep, a secure roof." "It sounds exhausting," she whispered. "It is," Alfred agreed. "But it beats the alternative." He reached out, closing the distance on the couch, and placed his hand lightly over hers. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a grounding one. Skin against skin, warmth against the cold. Camilla didn't pull away. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. She let out a long, shuddering breath, closed her eyes, and finally, for the first time in her life, allowed herself to just be a passenger. The smell of burnt toast and cheap drip coffee dragged Camilla out of a deep, dreamless sleep. She opened her eyes to a ceiling map of water stains. The couch beneath her smelled of dust and generic laundry detergent. Her neck was stiff. Her ribs throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, and she was wearing clothes she had slept in. For the former CEO of a billion-dollar analytics firm, it was rock bottom. For Alfred Pendleton, it was Wednesday morning. Camilla sat up, pulling the scratchy wool blanket around her shoulders. The apartment was loud. The radiator hissed, a siren wailed 2 blocks over, and from the kitchen, a small voice was interrogating someone about dinosaurs. But if the T-Rex had tiny arms, how did he put on a hat? Maya asked. He didn't wear hats, Bug, Alfred's voice replied, followed by the scrape of a butter knife on toast. He was a giant lizard. Hats are a mammalian construct. Go brush your teeth. Camilla swung her legs off the couch. Her bare feet hit the cold, scarred linoleum. She walked toward the kitchenette, feeling stripped of every layer of armor she had spent the last decade building. She had no portfolio, no title, no assistants to manage her schedule. She had a hangover from 2 fingers of bottom-shelf bourbon and a bruised sternum. Alfred looked up from the counter as she stepped into the light. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt and jeans, handing a plate of toast to Maya, who was eyeing Camilla with the unapologetic curiosity of a 6-year-old. You're the lady from the hospital, Maya said, pointing a sticky finger. Dad said you choked on a nut. Maya, manners, Alfred reprimanded gently. It's all right, Camilla said, her voice rough. She looked at the little girl, taking in the mismatched socks and the missing front teeth. Your dad is right. I ate something I shouldn't have. He helped me. He's good at fixing things, Maya stated matter-of-factly, grabbing her toast and darting toward the bathroom. Alfred grabbed a second mug, poured coffee into it, and slid it across the chipped Formica counter. It's not Ethiopian single origin, but it's hot. Camilla took the mug, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. Thank you. For last night. And for the couch. Don't mention it, Alfred said. He picked up a rag and started wiping down the counter with methodical practice strokes. What's the play today? You calling your lawyers? My lawyers work for the board now, Camilla said, taking a sip. The coffee was bitter and overly strong. It tasted exactly like reality. Any attorney I hire to fight the injunction will demand a retainer I can't currently access. Richard froze my personal assets pending an internal audit to ensure I didn't misappropriate funds during my erratic phase. Alfred stopped wiping. He looked at her, his brow furrowing. Can they do that? If they claim I was using company resources to fund personal side projects, like buying a fleet company and a block of Brooklyn real estate, yes. It's a standard asset freeze in corporate disputes involving fiduciary duty. They want to starve me out, force me to take a lowball severance, and disappear. She walked over to the small, rickety table serving as Alfred's dining area and sat down. On it sat a bulky 5-year-old laptop covered in stickers. Can I use this? She asked. Alfred nodded. Password is Maya 2020. Camilla opened the machine. It whirred loudly, the fan struggling to boot up the operating system. She didn't have her proprietary software, her predictive algorithms, or her server access. But she had something Richard and the board didn't realize she possessed. An intimate, eidetic memory of the company's financial architecture. For the next 4 hours, while Alfred walked Maya to school and returned to sort out his own life, Camilla worked. She created dummy accounts, bypassed firewalls using backdoors she had coded herself 7 years ago, and started pulling public filing records, cross-referencing them with the breadcrumbs she could scrape from the deep web. When Alfred returned at noon, carrying a paper bag smelling of greasy diner food, Camilla hadn't moved. The table was covered in handwritten notes scribbled on the backs of old utility bills. Eat, Alfred commanded, dropping a foil-wrapped sandwich on top of her notes. Camilla blinked, pulling her eyes away from the screen. He's cooking the books, Alfred. Alfred pulled up a chair, unwrapping a pastrami on rye. Who? Richard? Yes. The buyout clause wasn't just about getting rid of me. It was about covering his tracks, Camilla said, her words spilling out in a rapid, energized clip. She pointed at a web of numbers she had drawn on an envelope. For the last 14 months, Richard has been redirecting our logistics predictive models to favor a specific network of shell companies. Warehousing, shipping, supply chain management. He's purposefully starving independent contractors and routing our massive corporate clients to subsidiaries he secretly owns. Alfred chewed his sandwich slowly. So he's a thief. He's worse than a thief. He's building a monopoly using my company's data, and he's crushing the working-class infrastructure of this city to do it, Camilla said, her eyes dark with fury. He's forcing out small fleets, bankrupting independent drivers, and buying their assets for pennies through these shell corps. He didn't flag your file because you refused my NDA, Alfred. He flagged your file because the fleet company you worked for was his next acquisition target, and he wanted to clear out the senior drivers to cut pension liabilities before the buyout. Alfred stopped chewing. The background hum of the refrigerator seemed to vanish, leaving only a cold, heavy silence in the room. He thought about the dispatcher he knew who had lost his home. He thought about his own pink eviction notice. It wasn't just bad luck. It was a calculated algorithm run by a man in a glass tower. You're telling me, Alfred said, his voice dropping an octave, that this guy is the reason half my buddies are driving 12 hours a day and still can't make rent. Yes. Camilla looked him dead in the eye. It's a systemic bleed. He's treating human lives as rounding errors. Alfred looked at the battered laptop, then at the billionaire sitting at his cheap kitchen table. He felt a familiar, cold anger settling into his bones. It was the same anger he felt when he saw a rigged meter or a crooked cop, It was the demand for hard karma. Digital trails can be deleted, Alfred said quietly. If you go to the SEC with a bunch of notes on the back of my light bill, they'll laugh you out of the room. I know, Camilla said, the frustration bleeding back into her voice. I need physical proof, shipping manifests, invoices signed by his alias. But those are locked in paper files at his primary warehouse in Queens. I can't get in there. I don't even have a car. Alfred stood up. He walked over to the hook by the door and grabbed his keys. The keys to the black Lincoln Navigator he technically still managed as director of logistics. I do, Alfred said. Put your shoes on. We're going to Queens. The industrial park in Long Island City was a desolate grid of corrugated steel, cracked concrete, and chain-link fences topped with razor wire. It smelled of diesel fumes and damp cardboard. Alfred parked the Lincoln 2 blocks away, wedging the luxury SUV between a rusted box truck and an overflowing dumpster. The clock on the dashboard read 11:45 p.m. The warehouse is leased under the name Apex Logistics, Camilla said, sitting in the passenger seat. She was wearing her oversized trench coat again, her face illuminated by the harsh white glow of Alfred's tablet. According to the municipal records I pulled, it's a paper-only facility. Old school. They keep the physical ledgers there to avoid digital audits by the IRS. Which means there's a security guard, and probably cameras, Alfred noted, staring at the dimly lit street ahead. Can we bypass them? Alfred turned his head, giving her a flat, unamused look. Camilla, I drive a car for a living. I'm not a cat burglar. I don't own grappling hooks. Right. Sorry. She rubbed her temples. I'm used to just paying people to solve these kinds of bottlenecks. Well, your checkbook is frozen, so we use the street method, Alfred said, unbuckling his seatbelt. You stay here. Lock the doors. Where are you going? To create a bottleneck. Alfred slipped out of the SUV, blending into the shadows of the alleyway. Camilla watched him go, a sudden sharp spike of anxiety hitting her chest. In the boardroom, risk was measured in percentages and stock points. Out here, risk was measured in physical violence and police sirens. 10 minutes passed. The silence in the car was suffocating. Suddenly, a loud metallic crash echoed from the street parallel to the warehouse, followed by the blaring, rhythmic honk of a commercial truck horn. Camilla jumped, her heart hammering against her healing ribs. Through the rearview mirror, she saw the flashing yellow lights of a tow truck aggressively backing into the chained gate of the Apex warehouse. A man in a high-visibility vest jumped out, shouting angrily at the empty cab of his own truck. A heavy-set security guard emerged from the guardhouse, a flashlight beam cutting through the dark, yelling at the tow truck driver. While the guard was distracted by the orchestrated chaos at the front gate, a shadow slipped over the concrete wall at the rear of the property. Alfred landed heavily in the damp grass behind the warehouse. His knees groaned in protest. He crept along the corrugated steel wall until he found the employee side door. He didn't have lockpicks, but he had something better. The knowledge that cheap warehouse managers never fix the latches on fire doors. He wedged a flathead screwdriver into the gap, leaned his weight into it, and popped the rusted deadbolt. He slipped inside. The air was stale, smelling of old paper and dust. Row upon row of metal filing cabinets stretched into the darkness. He clicked on a small pen light, holding it between his teeth. Manifests. 2025 to 2026. He moved quickly, his boots making no sound on the concrete. He found the section labeled Accounts Receivable, Priority. He pulled the drawers open, scanning the manila folders. Camilla had told him what to look for. Signatures from a Thomas Sterling, Richard's known alias, authorizing payments from the parent company directly to Apex. He found them. Hundreds of them. Thick stacks of paper proving that Richard was bleeding his own company dry and pocketing the cash while systematically destroying small logistics businesses across the eastern seaboard. Alfred grabbed 4 thick folders, shoved them into the canvas messenger bag across his chest, and slammed the drawers shut. He was halfway to the door when the overhead light slammed on. Alfred froze. 100 yards away, standing near the loading dock, was a man in a tailored suit, flanked by 2 massive figures in dark windbreakers. It wasn't the security guard. I told the board she wouldn't go quietly, A voice echoed across the warehouse. Alfred squinted against the glare. The man in the suit began walking down the aisle toward him. It was the lawyer from the hospital. David. "Mr. Pendleton, isn't it?" David called out, his footsteps echoing on the concrete. "The heroic driver. Richard suspected Camilla might use you as an errand boy. It's pathetic, really. A billionaire hiding behind a chauffeur." Alfred didn't move. He calculated the distance to the fire door. 30 feet. The two muscle-bound men were closing in fast. "Put the bag down, Alfred," David said smoothly, stopping 20 feet away. "This is corporate business. It's above your pay grade. You walk away right now, and we forget you were trespassing. You try to leave with those files, and these gentlemen will break both your legs before they call the cops. Who will take care of your daughter while you're in Rikers?" Alfred's grip on the canvas bag tightened. The mention of Maya sent a spike of pure, unadulterated ice through his veins. He looked at David. He looked at the tailored suit, the smug expression, the absolute certainty that money and power gave them the right to take whatever they wanted, squash whoever was in their way, and walk away clean. "You guys really don't get it, do you?" Alfred said, his voice eerily calm. David frowned. "Get what?" "You think you own the streets because you buy the buildings," Alfred said, stepping forward instead of backward. "But you don't know how the machinery works. You don't know the people who actually drive the trucks, run the meters, and haul your garbage." Alfred reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He pressed a single button. Outside, the chaotic yelling at the front gate abruptly stopped. The tow truck horn died. In its place rose a new sound, a low, thunderous rumble that vibrated through the concrete floor of the warehouse. David turned around, looking toward the loading bays. The massive corrugated metal doors at the front of the warehouse suddenly buckled inward with a shrieking tear of metal. The grill of a 20-ton garbage truck smashed through the barrier, glass and steel raining down onto the floor. Behind it, two more heavy-duty tow trucks roared into the gap, their headlights blindingly bright, flooding the warehouse in chaotic light. The two bodyguards stopped dead in their tracks, shielding their eyes. Alfred smiled grimly. He had called in a few favors from the boys at the dispatch center, the ones who had lost their pensions because of Apex Logistics. "I'd suggest you move, David," Alfred yelled over the roar of the diesel engines. "The sanitation union is very upset about their contracts." While the lawyers and the muscle scrambled backward to avoid the massive trucks pouring into the facility, Alfred sprinted for the fire door. He threw it open, bolted across the damp grass, and scrambled over the wall, the heavy canvas bag thumping against his back. He hit the alleyway running. The Lincoln Navigator's passenger door flew open before he even reached it. He threw himself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. "Drive!" Camilla yelled, her eyes wide with adrenaline. Alfred threw the car into gear, slammed the gas pedal to the floor, and tore out of the alley, leaving the chaos of the industrial park behind them. He merged onto the BQE, the city lights streaking past the windows. His heart was hammering against his ribs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked over at Camilla. She was clutching the canvas bag to her chest like it was a life preserver. "Did you get it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Alfred reached over and patted the thick folders protruding from the bag. "We got him." Camilla let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She slumped back against the leather seat, turning her head to look at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a sharp, electric clarity in the air between them. "You're out of your mind," she whispered. "I'm a logistics director," Alfred corrected, a slow grin spreading across his face. "I moved the freight." The boardroom on the 54th floor of the Hayes Analytics Tower was a monument to wealth and silence. A massive mahogany table sat in the center, surrounded by 12 leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, placing the occupants quite literally above the rest of the world. At 9 a.m. on Friday, the board was in session. Richard sat at the head of the table. He was a man in his late 50s, with silver hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was currently reviewing the final buyout agreement that would formally sever Camilla Hayes from her own company. "If there are no further objections," Richard said, his voice projecting smooth authority. "I call for a vote to finalize the severance package and officially transfer interim CEO duties to myself." The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. "I object." The room went dead silent. Camilla walked in. She wasn't wearing a faded sweatshirt or a borrowed coat. She was wearing a razor-sharp crimson blazer, tailored black trousers, and a pair of stilettos that clicked against the hardwood floor like gunshots. Her hair was pulled back into its severe, immaculate knot. The billionaire had returned. Behind her walked Alfred. He wore his only suit, freshly pressed, holding a thick brown leather briefcase. He didn't look at the skyline. He looked at the men and women at the table with the cold, assessing gaze of a man checking his rearview mirror for a threat. "Camilla," Richard said, recovering quickly, though a vein throbbed near his temple. "This is a closed session. You are currently suspended from all corporate duties. Security should not have let you up here." "I own 51% of the voting shares, Richard. Security works for me," Camilla said, walking slowly toward the table. "And as of this moment, your vote is irrelevant. I am holding an emergency shareholders meeting." A murmur rippled through the board members. David, the lawyer, stood up near the back of the room, his face pale as he locked eyes with Alfred. "Camilla, this behavior only further proves your instability," Richard said, adopting a tone of patronizing concern. "Please, let us handle this with dignity. Don't make a scene." "I'm not making a scene, Richard. I'm performing an extraction," Camilla said. She stopped at the opposite end of the table and held her hand out to Alfred. Alfred placed the briefcase on the mahogany wood, popped the latches, and pulled out the stacks of paper he had pulled from the warehouse. He pushed them down the length of the table. Those are the physical shipping manifests, signed invoices, and bank routing numbers for Apex Logistics, fronted by Thomas Sterling, Camilla announced, her voice ringing with absolute lethal clarity. "A company that, as of midnight last night, has been formally linked to your personal offshore accounts by an independent forensic audit team I hired." Richard stared at the papers. His smooth veneer cracked, replaced by a sudden, ugly panic. "This is fabricated," Richard stammered, looking at the board members. "This is a desperate smear campaign by an ousted executive." "It gets worse, Richard," Alfred interrupted. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the heavy, unmovable weight of truth. He stepped forward, planting his hands on the table. "Because the drivers you bankrupted, the guys you forced out of their pensions to boost your margins, they kept their own logbooks, and they handed them over to the federal prosecutor's office in the Southern District at 8 o'clock this morning." David slumped back into his chair, putting his head in his hands. "You didn't just breach fiduciary duty," Camilla continued, her voice turning to ice. "You committed wire fraud, corporate espionage, and racketeering. The SEC isn't investigating me, Richard. The FBI is investigating you, and they are currently waiting in the lobby downstairs." Complete paralyzing silence descended on the room. The board members, sharks who smelled blood in the water, immediately began physically leaning away from Richard. Richard looked at the files, then at Camilla, and finally, at Alfred. The absolute ruin of his life was written in the ink on those pages. "You have two choices," Camilla said softly, leaning over the table. "You sign a confession, tender your immediate resignation, and surrender all your shares back to the company treasury to cover the damages you caused. Or you walk out of here in handcuffs and fight the federal government in court for the next 10 years. You have 60 seconds. Alfred watched as a man who had casually destroyed thousands of lives from the safety of a spreadsheet completely broke apart in less than a minute. Richard's hands shook as he reached into his jacket, pulled out a gold fountain pen, and scrawled his signature on the resignation document Camilla slid toward him. The hard karma had finally arrived, delivered not by a corporate algorithm, but by a driver from Brooklyn. 10 minutes later, Richard was escorted out by security. The board, terrified and suddenly desperate to appease their reinstated CEO, immediately voted to authorize emergency compensation packages for all drivers and contractors affected by the Apex scam. When the doors finally closed, leaving Camilla and Alfred alone in the massive room, the tension drained out of the air like water from a cracked vase. Camilla leaned against the edge of the mahogany table, letting out a long, ragged exhale. She looked out at the city skyline, the sun glinting off the glass towers. She had her empire back, but looking at it now, it didn't feel like the center of the universe anymore. Alfred stood near the door, picking up his empty briefcase. "Well, that was a hell of a fare." Camilla turned to look at him. "You're going back to the logistics floor? Someone has to make sure those compensation checks actually get routed to the drivers," Alfred said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Can't trust you corporate types with the details." Camilla walked toward him. The stilettos clicked, but her pace was slow, deliberate. She stopped right in front of him, looking up into his face. "You saved my life again, Alfred," she said quietly. "Just evening the score," Alfred replied, his voice softening. "You got my heat fixed. I got your company back. Ledger is balanced." "I don't want the ledger to be balanced," Camilla whispered. She reached up, her hands sliding over the lapels of his cheap suit, resting flat against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. Alfred looked down at her. He saw the woman who had slept on his terrible couch, who had eaten cheap toast with his daughter, and who had fought like a demon to protect the people she didn't even know. He dropped the briefcase. It hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. Alfred wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close, careful of her ribs, but firm enough to let her know he wasn't letting go. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of life. There was no panic, no blood, no sirens in the distance. It was a slow, deep, grounded promise. It tasted like expensive coffee, triumph, and the terrifying, beautiful reality of two completely different worlds colliding and finally deciding to merge. When they broke apart, Camilla rested her forehead against his chin, letting out a shaky breath. "So," she murmured, a small smile curving her lips. "What time do we have to pick up Maya?" Alfred smiled, pulling her closer. 3:30, but the meter is officially off. And that is exactly how hard karma is delivered to the elite. Alfred and Camilla proved that when the grounded reality of the streets meets the fierce intelligence of the boardroom, no corrupt system stands a chance. Viewers who expected that massive garbage truck entrance should leave their favorite moments down in the comments. For audiences who love this deeply emotional, high-stakes collision of worlds, the best way to support the channel is to smash that like button, share the story with someone who loves a satisfying underdog victory, and subscribe to the channel for more intense, grounded storytelling. The channel will be back with more next time.